Chapter 6 June 13th, 2033 Seattle, Washington, USA 70th floor, Illini Building 7 degrees Fahrenheit 1507 hours. The air was absolutely frigid. It hit my face like a million little knives, cutting cold straight to the bone. I couldn't believe the glass hadn't shattered from the rapid change in temperature. The 5 of us jogged to the storage room. I immediately started grabbing boxes. Each was labeled, which made finding the necessary supplies easy. Even with gloves and a beanie on, my exposed skin started to go numb. My nose started to run and ache, and my throat felt raw from the chilly air. I quickly worked up a sweat as I moved boxes along the human chain we established. We moved a few crates of MREs out into the main office, then found boxes with additional heavy jackets and sleeping bags. As the guys started carting those boxes into the server room, I started taking stock. We had boxes with hundreds of yards of heavy plastic sheeting, duct tape, staple guns, some industrial batteries, portable heaters. We had a lot of stuff, and it seemed that whoever had ordered the stock had anticipated cold. Behind the cold gear was a series of boxes that were relatively useless. High SPF sunblock, fans, misters, and other trinkets to help deal with high temperatures. Off to one side sat a single box with extreme cold gear. It had multiple layers of clothing designed to deal with sub-zero temperatures. It only held enough for 6 people to be fully outfitted. As I looked over the boxes of random supplies, I had an idea. Larry walked in while I thought over the heavy sheeting.
"What's up?"
he rumbled. His voice was as deep as he was big. He dug through the extreme winter gear box, swapping everything but his base layer out. Then he started handing layers to me to help deal with the cold. I nodded and changed while he explained my idea. "I think if we mount the heavy sheeting to the ceiling and floor and keep it tightly shut with the tape, we can expand our living area. If we double it up, it can act like an airlock or double-pane windows. Keep the heat in."
"It's a pretty good idea. Why plastic sheeting, though? Isn't there anything better?"
"Nah. When I was a kid, my family lost power during the winter for a few days. My dad hung plastic like this in one room, and we stayed there. Without building something permanent, this is a great way to keep heat in. Hopefully, rescue comes soon. It should hold until then. This is really only a matter of getting it warm in the first place. Help me with these rolls." He nodded, and we started wrestling the rolls of heavy sheeting out to the main office. After we had the first half dozen out, I went searching for the staple guns and tape that I had seen earlier. I hauled a box of supplies out. Larry set to work while I continued to poke through what we had. A few hours later, Jesse called to me as I was buried deep in the boxes.
"Dante, come eat already. If you're going to be messing around and doing a bunch of crap, you need food."
I grunted in agreement and started climbing back out. A moment later, I stood at the threshold and looked at Jesse. "Well, where's my food?"
"It's in the server room, idiot. You can't eat food out here. It would freeze before you finished."
I grunted and walked into her office, where the cold once again hit me. Apparently, I had been working so hard in the storage room, I had managed to raise the temperature by a few degrees. I turned to glance out the windows at the city as I walked out of her office. Frost coated the insides of the windows, so I took a moment to scrub a hole with my sleeve. Small lights from a few cars still flickered on the streets far below. Mostly, the hulks of the towers rose up, dead and dark. There was plenty of movement, but it was mostly debris being whipped around by the winds. The building constantly swayed a little bit, just detectable at this height. This close to the windows, I could just make out the screaming of the wind. It sounded horrible. Shrieks and moans blending together with glass shattering and metal rending. I shook myself and walked back to the airlock. A few sheets had already been attached to the south side, covering the windows. They sat about 18 inches from the glass, with a second layer already added an inch from that. At 4 feet wide, we would need a lot of sheets to cover the entire office. I stepped into the airlock and it cycled. Cold air immediately fogged in the much warmer server room. When I put them back on, I spotted Linda and Eddie eating nearby. I walked over and sat with them. Linda had an MRE and 2 bottles of water waiting for me. Jesse must have known where I would go. Night fell. or so we guessed, based on the watches that were wound and the cell phones that still had battery. Signal had dropped out hours before, probably due to the windstorms. Debris regularly hit the windows beyond the airlock, creating loud pings that were attenuated by the glass and metal in the way. It disturbed me, knowing that stuff was swept off the ground more than 700 feet below and hitting the windows that kept us safe. In the end, it became an almost soothing rhythm, like wind chimes. Fancy sleeping bags were broken out of storage on the second round of storage room scouring. They even had pillows built in and were designed for below-zero temperatures. I removed my shoes and socks, determined that even if I had to sleep in my clothes, I would be as comfortable as possible. Though I doubted anybody zipped up since the room was fairly warm with that many people shoved in. The fans whirred away endlessly, taking away the humid heat and replacing it with cool, dry air. Everybody ended up drawn to their closest friends and family, often resulting in small groups of 2 to 4. I ended up with Linda and Eddie on one side and Jesse on my other. I was her closest friend even after all these years. I lay there for a long time, contemplating what had happened in the 16 hours since I got up. Eventually, quiet talking fell to quiet breathing. Then, the breathing deepened across the entire room and people fell off to sleep. An explosive snore suddenly tore the room, causing a few people to twitch. A second ripped through, and then a thud echoed throughout the cramped room. There was an oof of someone getting whacked awake, and the snoring stopped. It never returned. The lights never shut off, though they did dim if nobody moved much. I never really fell asleep. At least, that's what I told myself.